for you all. I have got with me today two people that have been involved in the publishing of this amazing book called Made in London. So if you haven't heard about it, it showcases 50 of the capital's best factories and workshops. Apparently, there are over 4,000 factories and workshops in the capital. And this book has 50 of them in there, which are photographed by Carmel King. And the intro and the book is put together by Mark Brearley, who is a UK manufacturer himself. He owns a factory called Kmet. So let me bring in Mark and Carmel. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys.
Hi.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Brilliant. So I'm a massive fan of the book, of course, and it's made me want to get out and see all of these factories because I haven't actually seen all of them. Before we come on to talk about how the book came about, let's just show everyone a few of the amazing photos from the book. So, Mark, that's your own factory there, isn't it, Kmet? You make these amazing metal trays.
Yep.
Some of the factories that I've visited, we've got the Freed Ballet Shoe Factory. My photographs never looked like that when I went there. Kashket, who make military uniforms, incredible, in North London. You've also been to Ince Umbrellas, who are one of our Make It British members, making umbrellas in East London. The Tate and Lyle factory, which I believe is one of the biggest factories in the capital. What else we got here? The vinyl factory, amazing that we still make vinyl records in London. And Brompton Bikes, of course. So amazing. Guys, tell us all. How did the book come about? Whose idea was it? Tell me everything. Who wants to go first?
Yeah. Well, once upon a time, I worked for the Mayor of London, and just over a decade ago, we had some riots in London. We got sent up to Tottenham to find out what was going on. And one of the results of that is we started doing an audit of the economy of that area. And we were surprised and pleased to discover how much manufacturing was going on. And ever since, I've been putting together knowledge on that. And I got to a list of 4,000. And then a few years ago, I started collaborating with Carmel. It started actually asking her to photograph my own factory and other manufacturers in the area we're in, Old Kent Road area. And one thing led to another. And of course, we wanted to do a book. So here we are.
Brilliant. And Carmel, is it the first time before Mark invited you to do this? I mean, photographing factories, it's quite a skill. Is it the first time you'd been out and about and seen these factories?
Well, about a decade ago, or maybe about 8 years ago, I started photographing factories in the area I lived in, Walthamstow. I was really keen to document the creative community there, and that's actually how I met Mark, through his own audits. So I kind of did quite a few: the Black Horse Lane Atelier, God's Own Junkyard, the amazing Electro Signs. You know, there are plenty in that borough, and I actually got a grant from Waltham Forest to start documenting what was there. So that led to collaborating with Mark, and as Mark said, we just knew that it would be a good book. So we've always kind of had it on the back burner and just waiting for the right moment to approach a publisher, and that's when we approached Merrill last summer.
And how did you choose? Like you say, there's 4,000 factories in London, Mark, which is certainly more than I have on my list. How did you first kind of research and find 4,000 factories, and then how did you pick 50 particular favourites to go in the book?
Well, researching is just going out and walking around industrial areas and making notes and spotting what's on the side of vans and various attempts at trawling through the internet, which of course gets you different results every time you try something slightly different, and word of mouth and etc. It's just slowly built up this knowledge. And of course it's started from realizing that no one had this knowledge, which was a bit disappointing, but also quite an exciting challenge. Like, well, why doesn't anybody know? So now we do know a lot more. Choosing the ones for the book, well, that was very hard. I mean, it was a decision early on that 50 was a reasonable number. Even that makes quite a hefty book. But as soon as we started trying to think, okay, we want a range of types to show, range of sizes of business, and a good spread across the geography of London, then suddenly 50 was really hard to narrow it down to. So it wasn't easy, but we just kind of came up with lists, and then Carmel was the one who got the job of contacting them and asking them if she could come and visit and photograph. And that, of course, led to other consequences, because lots didn't reply or weren't interested.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
So were there any that just said, "Just kind of shove off. I don't want you in my factory with your camera"?
Well, one that we were really keen on was Ford, and they were actually incredibly encouraging and loved the idea of the book, but access was very difficult, and they're actually moving over to kind of making electric vehicles. So I think they thought the timing wasn't right, but that would have been a great one, as obviously it's been here one of the longest and is the biggest.
Yeah, and I grew up near Rainham, so I remember the Ford factory when I was a kid in Romford. Like, everyone had a Ford because it was the done thing. So that's a shame, but maybe that's for volume 2.
Absolutely. And you did say best in your intro, and I will absolutely just reiterate that, the 50 that we chose are very much not the best. Just as Mark said, we wanted a really good cross section and wanted to try and have one in every borough, at least one in every borough. So it was a good spread.
Yeah, because you've got everything in there from, the shoemakers and people that make beer and cars and paint, and the glass eye factory, actually, I think was probably the one that I was most amazed at. Incredible. I didn't know there was anyone that made glass eyes in London. And, what did stand out to me about a lot of these factories, and particularly like people like the glass eye chap, is it shows that some of these people have been doing this for so long, and what's going to happen when he is no longer around. I mean, did this occur to you as you were visiting places about the fact that it's almost like a dying tradition? Mark, I know you particularly there's a quote that you said in the book, which I loved, which was, and I don't have the exact words that you said, but it was about the fact that we should be proud of the manufacturing that happens in London. And it's a real shame that we've lost some of that over the last few years. So, was that something that was apparent to you about how manufacturing is in the decline in London, or do you think it's growing again?
I think it's growing again, but it's changing. I mean, there's very few. You mentioned Tate and Lyle, an amazing example of a big process plant. Well, that's not the future of London manufacturing. There's been a dramatic decline of those kind of big process plants. But the more niche and specialist, and almost all of it smaller scale stuff, seems to be going through a bit of a renaissance at the moment. Some sectors, for example, garments and a lot of craft-based businesses that add up to quite a lot across many, many small businesses, they're really flourishing again. So no, I think overall it isn't declining, but certainly there's always that worry about very niche skills being lost. And it's a genuine worry. There's always succession challenges, but I have been hearing that for many decades, and I'm sure people have been worrying about that going back into the 19th century, about skills dying out, and most of them somehow don't die out. They survive.
Yeah. That is so true. I mean, you yourself own a manufacturing company. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about how that came about as well? Because I love that story, because that's not your background, is it? What was your background originally, and why did you end up buying a manufacturing company?
Well, I'm an architect and urbanist, so I'm very interested in how cities work and what goes on in places, but it wasn't my job. But when I worked for the mayor, and I mentioned that story of getting a list together and researching, I decided to get my wife some. She had a birthday coming, and I thought, I'll get her 50 things made in London, and one of them was trays. So I said, let's get in touch with them, and the proprietor said, come and visit the factory. So we both went along to the factory, and a few months later he emailed me and said, I'm thinking of packing it in. So then it became a a two-family business. We took on the business, and so that's how that's what happened. From 2013, we've been driving it forward with, I suppose, a different momentum.
Yeah, I love the fact. I could see myself doing that. I often walk into factories and think, I wish I owned a factory. I love the fact that you just went and got one. That's amazing.
It's a surprisingly common story, actually.
Yeah.
People coming from Italy in London. You get a lot of people who just, it happens and they say, yeah, I'm going to do that. And they take on, often with no background in manufacturing, often they do, but often with none.
There's a great story there about the Barbara Wilson tap, a similar story, where Jen was looking around because he'd been offered the site as a property site, and he was going very much with that hat on. And then I think when he realised the history that was there, that they'd been making taps there for almost 100 years, he just couldn't bear to sort of take it all down and start again and just build some flats. So he's actually taken on the tap factory now.
And that is what's lovely about your book, actually. Rather than just being a photography book, no disrespect, obviously, Carmel, because your photographs are beautiful, but you've embellished the photographs by adding in the most amazing text as well that tells the story of each individual manufacturer. I think is so important. In fact, there was a third person involved in the book, wasn't there? We should probably give credit. Do you want to just name the person who did the writing as well, so we don't leave her out?
Absolutely. So Claire Dowdy, we brought on board to do the writing. We knew that she'd do a great job because she's worked for Monocle, Wallpaper. There used to be a great industry mag as well that she edited. So we knew that she'd be brilliant at sort of sniffing out those stories, interviewing them and writing it up. It's actually quite challenging because I think she just had 300 words. So had to create very sort of concise stories for each one. But as you said, we were so absolutely adamant that we would have the stories there, not just the images, because, every factory's got an incredible story. Many of them are family owned, so there's 5th, 6th, even 7th generation, which is amazing.
So out of all of them then, if I had to ask you both to pick favourites, which ones would they be? Mark, do you want to go first? Who are your favourite factories in London?
Well, it's a bit like asking a parent which is their favourite child. Of course, they're all favourites. But if I'm allowed two, I'd first of all go with my own. Not just because I'm all proud of it and all that, but because there's something, I suppose, that people who just visit a factory don't realise, that it's a very intimate relationship that everyone has with it. You get to know the sounds, what they all mean. You get to know the smell of it, and the physicality of it, the way it's arranged, and of course, every place of production, as every place of work, is a community. So it's about the people, and it's a very human thing. So your own one, you have this very special relationship with. And then if I were to pick one of the other ones, I think I'd probably go for Tate & Lyle. Just because what's not to like about big process plants? They're particularly amazing things, and we have this one in London that remains because of it's so capital intensive. It would cost hundreds and hundreds of millions to make a new one, so that's why they stay where they are, and they've got the river, and it all works very, very well for them. But it's an extraordinary machine of production. And has an amazing atmosphere in his giant sugar mountain, and big machines and lines doing their thing. So yeah, I'd choose that one.
Brilliant. I thought you were going to say there, what's not to like about sugar. Brilliant. How about you, Carmel? Which are your favourite London factories that you've been to?
Well, I love the vinyl factory in Hayes. It's on the original site of the HMV factory. So there's this amazing sense of history there. Even some of the machines have still got HMV stamped all over them. And the vinyl factory, the kind of more modern incarnation, is very much, taking on that history and producing vinyl records in very much the same way. They're made by steam-powered machinery, which in this day and age is incredible to witness. So you see the vinyl puck, with a paper label which has been baked so that the paper doesn't have any water in. You see that sort of start off at the beginning of the production line, and then you see, this huge amounts of pressure flattens out the puck and it comes out the other end as a kind of flattened 12-inch vinyl, which is just wonderful to see. There's real kind of alchemy there as well, because they create the masters in these vats of acid. So just to kind of witness the whole production line, and just a really diverse workforce, as with many of the factories in London, brilliant to see women, of men of every different heritage. And so, I don't know, that just kind of encapsulated a really good London factory that can't meet the demand. They've got far too much demand to keep up with. They having to put people on huge waiting lists because everyone wants to make records again.
And in fact, keeping up with demand and kind of the growth of some of these factories, a lot of them are being forced out of London. And you've mentioned that, Mark, like particularly in areas where they want to kind of regenerate, I suppose, and put more houses in. I mean, you've yourself have mentioned about KMET, and you're in an area where potentially the developers are swooping. It's such a shame. Do you think there's anything we can do to try and reverse that, or is it just inevitable that a lot of factories that are right in the inner kind of zone 1 and zone 2 of London will have to start moving out to zones 4 and 5?
Well, it's not just about inner London. It's actually all of London that this process is happening. And yeah, you're right. It's very sad and pretty brutal often. We've got 4 tower cranes have just gone up on the site nearly next door to our factory. So you walk into our yard now and there's 4 tower cranes busy doing their thing. So it's pretty in your face. Good planning is the answer. The planning world has been flunking it massively in London, and I think they should be ashamed of themselves. I think it's all layers of government. We see them as the enemy. I mean, I'm afraid it's as simple as that. Government is enemy because of the way that they've either sat by and watched or encouraged this displacement process. And they just need an attitude change. And of course, that's one of the motivations for doing something like the book. Of course, you want the book to be celebratory because it's a marvel that there is this stuff. But there's also this slightly tougher edge to it, which is saying, come on, everybody, and especially come on layers of government, come on local authorities, planning authorities, get your act together, because this is just not right that you would allow step-by-step destruction of a very impressive layer of the economy.
Exactly. London would be a much less interesting and colourful place if it didn't have, like you say, you can wander around and stumble across people that, make umbrellas or make glass eyes. We've got a really good question actually coming from Russ, which says, how many employees on average would you say these hidden factories employ, and how much floor space do they kind of take up? And are they quite often unusual premises? Who wants to answer that one? Mark, do you know anything about the stats on the number of employees? Well, you probably saw that from when you went round.
I would guess that 20 or 30 is an average. In the range between only one that's over 1,000 and huge numbers that are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people. The manufacturers in London are predominantly small businesses. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them are. And an average in premises that are a few thousand square feet would be an average size. Again, some are much larger, quite a few are tiny. But it's interesting. I mean, it's in a way adjusted itself to be compatible with London. We don't have vast factories. We don't have factories with thousands and thousands of people these days. So it's impressively small and mostly independent businesses. It just so happens.
So,
And they seem to obviously fall in two camps of, those that were lucky enough to buy their premises years ago, so therefore had quite a lot of security, and others who unfortunately weren't able to and were constantly at the peril of, landlords moving them on.
So then the $1 million question is, are you going to cover any other cities? Is the Made in Birmingham coming, or Made in Belfast? Made in Glasgow? Any plans? You've both gone quiet on me, so I'm guessing it was quite a labour of love putting the first book together.
No, I mean, I would love to carry on regionally. I think every city's got the story, and I'm actually talking to Paul Jacobs, who rescued Ernest Wright, the scissor factory in Sheffield, and we both know that Sheffield's got a fascinating history. So I think there's kind of stories to be told in every corner of the British Isles. It's just working out how you make that archive, whether it's funding or, a more kind of commercial project like a book. That's all up in the air, I guess.
So did you get funding to produce this book?
Merrill very kindly bankrolled this. I think Hugh was amazing from the start. His grandfather was a Londoner, so he really believed in this story. And when I first went to him with the idea, we talked about made in England, made in Britain. Obviously, that would be an obvious story, but I think he really liked the idea of just going for London. It felt like a more succinct story, and that you could go in a bit deeper, whereas a made in Britain would be kind of just touching the surface with a book like that.
Yeah, that's true, because you'd be picking from thousands.
There was a little attempt to raise some sponsorship, which would have been very nice, but we were struck by the lack of interest, and that strikiness carries on. It's somehow, we think, why do all these other things get funding? If we were able to package this all as culture or art or oh no, this is creative economy, then it feels like there would be funding. But because it's manufacturing, and dare I say it, because a lot of it's all a bit working class, it doesn't seem to be attractive to the worlds of funding. And I think that's a whole other story, but it's really frustrating.
That's for a whole nother episode, Mark. Totally agree. So were there any London factories, aside from Ford, which you said you would have liked to include, were there any others that you absolutely love that for whatever reason didn't make the book?
A lot. Yeah.
Too many.
Dunhill in Walthamstow is one that I've wanted to go to for years. I've banged on their door since I started this project about 8 years ago. And I think it's partly because they make briar pipes. There's this kind of strange cloak and dagger scene about tobacco. But they weren't up for it this time. But
next time, for the next edition. Brilliant. Okay, so if people want to find the book, buy the book, where can they go? Where can they find it, Mark and Carmel?
Well, they can go to a behemoth online bookseller, of course.
Not Amazon. No.
Or another maybe even more appealing option is, it just so happens I set up a little website called London Makes, so I've been selling a few through that.
LondonMakes.com.
LondonMakes.com.
Okay, brilliant. I've just typed
because
I've been
doing a little Instagram for a few years on madeinlondon.uk. So the website just starts to put some of those posts on a website, and then selling the book. And of course, the next step will be, next project will be trying to get an association of London manufacturers going. So these are the first steps towards that.
Oh, that's exciting. Can I help with that?
Yes, please. We need
my help on, definitely.
Because we could do with a bit more voice.
Yes. Oh, I've got a loud voice. Brilliant. Carmel, one thing I want to ask you before you go. My photographs, whenever I go and visit factories, look rubbish. And I'm always saying as well to all of our members, make sure you're showcasing the manufacturers that make your products, because you can go to their factories and visit them. Come on, give us some top tips. How do we take good photographs in factories?
I decided very early on that I was going to take very little kit, and that I couldn't really influence the lighting. And it always amazes me when I turn up and there's these big yellow tungsten light bulbs. You just think, really, people are making things under these day in, day out. So the light, the light was really tricky and different in every place. So I would take a tripod. So if you can be bothered to take a tripod and do some long exposures, then that's going to help. And you could just take a little camera flash, although I tended not to use flash. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm used to, that's kind of almost my forte now. I'm used to going into very different conditions, and I quickly kind of suss out the light, what's happening. Occasionally if you want to get a nice portrait, you might move someone into a doorway or near a window just so you get nice light on them. But of course, in factories, rule number one is you can't stop anyone. They're on the production line and you cannot ask them to stop what they're doing, because time is money and they might be being paid per piece. So I did just have to get used to working very quickly and working with, whatever conditions I was given.
Yeah, that's so true. When you go into a factory, you don't want to, I have done this before, turn up with a load of lights and then it's in everyone's way. And like you say, you don't want to interrupt the actual flow of the production line. So yeah, you made it sound easy. You've obviously got an amazing camera though, being a photographer.
Very good camera.
Yeah, with an iPhone.
Just to chip in, I mean, Carmel's focusing on the technical aspects there, but there's a lot of human to it as well, and Carmel is very good at it. You have to get people to trust you quickly, and be sufficiently charming to get them to carry on doing what they're doing without feeling upset or worried or stressed by somebody taking photos, and that's often really tricky. To get shots of what's a human activity without people hiding from you or looking disturbed.
Yeah,
that's a real knack.
That is so true. That is so true. And I love the fact that you're bringing out about the human aspect in all of these places. And that's what I love about manufacturing. You go to a factory, you meet the people, and that is what really comes across in your book, I think, is the people behind the manufacturing in London. And it would be such a terrible shame if we lost any of this. So thank you to both of you for bringing this book, making this book a reality and bringing it out, because I hope that it reaches, a broad cross-section of people who can then really appreciate UK manufacturing and London manufacturing in particular. So thank you so much for joining me today, both of you. Amazing. You've been absolute superstars. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, chaps. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.